Hey everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the comments I hear from people who are interested in street photography is that they don't live near a major city where there's a lot of foot traffic. And so they think that, well, since I don't live in New York or in Paris or in Los Angeles, how can I ever practice street photography? And for me, street photography is a sensibility that can be practiced anywhere, whether you're in a major city or in a small town. I don't think that you really are reliant on living in a city where there's a lot of foot traffic in order to create interesting images. We've talked a lot about how to develop your way of seeing and how that alone can lead you to make some really interesting pictures in public. And so I want to talk about something that I've talked about before, is how to sort of attune your eye to a scene so that you can start making interesting street photographs without being so reliant on having an abundance of people on the street. Before I begin, I want to remind you that I'm going to be conducting a series of workshops this year. The next one is going to be in San Francisco at the StreetFoto SF workshop on June 9th and 10th as part of the events that StreetFoto SF is conducting in the Bay Area. And then in October 11th and 14th, I'll be conducting a workshop in New Orleans. And I've just announced two other workshops, the first of which is the New York two-day photo workshop that I'm going to be scheduling for October 6th and 7th. And then I'll be in Paris in September, September 15th and 16th for another two-day workshop. Right now we're offering a discounted rate for people who sign up early for both of those. And you'll find links below in the notes. And I hope to see some of you there. Okay, here we have a shot by Trenton James. This was created with a Fujifilm X100F at 1/1800th of a second at 5.6, ISO 200. So here is a scene where it's all about light and shadow, that transition between light and shadow, and the resulting contrast that it creates. So we have this marquee to an old theater in which this sunlight is hitting the facade here and hitting the old marquee. And then we have this fellow here who's walking through this area of shadow who is surrounded by this inky blackness, and which helps draw the viewer's eyes straight to him. So what's key here is the light that's illuminating him is really bright, making him probably one of the brighter elements in the frame. But this area of shadow around him is really key. Had he been slightly to the left and juxtaposed against this area here, his head would not be as cleanly defined as it is here. So the photographer here was really being careful in terms of not only how they composed the overall scene, but where they had their subject in order to be able to complete the frame. That's real careful seeing that I think is really essential. You really have to sort of anticipate where you want your subject to be. But this scene, I think, can happen anywhere, whether you're in a big city or in a small town. It really is about the quality of light and shadow that you have to play with. A lot of people think, well, man, if I was in New York City, I could be making great street photography all of the time. And, you know, New York City is a wonderful place to shoot street photography. But personally, I enjoy going into a small town just as much as I like being in the big city. Because for me, the raw materials for making an interesting photograph are everywhere. Whether I'm in the United States, whether I'm in Europe, whether I'm in the Caribbean, I'm always looking for light and shadow, line and shape, color, all the stuff that I talk about week after week after week. It can happen anywhere. And you really have to just begin to attune yourself to those very things. Because, you know, virtually every town, even if they don't have a working theater, probably still have a theater that would look very much like this. And by going out there at a particular point in time, you can really make some remarkable photographs just as a result of not looking at that as, oh, there's just another theater that I'm going to make a snapshot of, but looking at how the light and the shadow plays off of that scene. And hopefully you have a human figure here that can help complement the shot rather than just being an architectural shot. But pay attention always to light and shadow wherever you go, and that will sort of help you to attune your eye to the possibilities that are always out there. Here we have a shot by Moise Levi. This was created with an Apple iPhone 6 at 1/659th of a second at 2.2 ISO 32. So here's another example of a scene that could be virtually anywhere. Again, it's about the play of light and shadow on the stairs, on the wall here, which appears to be windows and apparently a skylight of some sort. And then we have this human figure here that provides a sense of scale and a point of contrast for this entire scene. So again, by paying attention to light and shadow, a scene was revealed to this photographer. And then they just allowed it to sort of play out until they finally had, in this case, a woman walk into this scene to help give a sense of scale, a context, and a counterpoint to all this. But look at how remarkable the light and the shadow is here. That's really at the heart of this photograph and the previous photograph that I was talking about. Again, a scene like this could happen anywhere. I'm always on the hunt for stuff like this. Whether I'm walking around in my neighborhood or if I'm going to downtown Los Angeles or I'm in San Francisco, really doesn't matter. I'm always paying attention to what's happening with the light. Because usually when I'm paying attention to the light and not really on the hunt for a specific kind of street photograph, things get revealed to me that I never would have considered otherwise. And that's part of the artistry of street photography, about being open to things that most other photographers would never consider photographing. You see a wealth of this kind of stuff in our Flickr pool. You see people photographing things that are the most ordinary, the most mundane things, but because of the way they're seeing it, they produce really wonderful photographs. So don't convince yourself into thinking, well, I just don't live in an interesting location and therefore I can't make as good a photograph as some of the people who are submitting to our pool. That's not the case at all. You just have to shift your attitude and your perceptions and start creating really interesting images. Like the image before, this image is biased for the highlights, allowing the shadows to go black. And there are a variety of different ways you can do this. If you're in aperture priority, you can just apply some minus compensation, maybe -1, in order to make these things naturally go black instead of having to accentuate that later on in Photoshop. Or if you're in manual exposure mode, you can base your exposure for the highlight area and allow the shadows to go black. And later, regardless of what way you metered or exposed for the scene, you can increase contrast or bring in your level slider in order to block up the shadows. But it's important to have an eye for this when you're shooting it, because by default, especially if you're using the multi-pattern metering system of your camera is going to try to open up the exposure for all this shadow detail and will try to give you a really even exposure. And what will happen is, yeah, you'll get detail here, but this area here and this area of the wall here will get completely blown out. So you have to be aware of how your camera meters and purposely override that in order to get this kind of high contrast look. If you rely on the camera completely for your exposure and you don't override it in that way, you won't get a result that looks like this. All right, here we have a shot by Marco Alexander, created with the Fujifilm X Pro 2 at 1/3800th of a second, f2 ISO 200. So here's another image in which light and shadow plays a critical role in the overall composition. We have this almost triangle of light in which this figure is situated here in this wonderful red jacket, white shoes, black leggings, smoking a cigarette, and whose shadow is cast here on the sidewalk here, serving as a wonderful counterpoint to his presence just in this area of the frame. But it's this area here, this triangle of shadow here, this other triangle of shadow that basically sandwiches him in this space. And then on top of that, you have this wonderful repetition of shape. These rectangles here, this rectangular here. The repetition of the triangles is not only happening here in the shadows, but it's also happening here in the corner of the buildings, in the shapes here of these, what I assume are garbage bins. This whole composition is really very graphic, but it's the contrast between light and shadow that makes this shot. He seems to have been shooting from an elevated position, so it allows him to accentuate those things. And if you were on the ground level, you would never even notice, just because you wouldn't take in these shapes from ground level. But because of the elevated position, all of these things take on a very graphic quality, off of which this character here plays off of everything. Color here is, great. The red, the orange, the yellow, and then these more muted colors here play off of each other really, really nicely. But you can see in this image and all the other images how light and shadow just open things up. But pay attention to how the light makes all the difference here. Not only the light and shadow here, but how that quality of light adds vibrancies to all the colors that exist within the frame. Colors in areas of shade become more muted. They become duller. But when you have that direct sunlight hitting very saturated colors, they just pop. And Marco here uses that to his advantage with the reds and the yellows and the oranges. And this is really sort of a nothing scene normally, right? This is just, looks to be some sort of industrial area. And there's this guy here who seems oddly dressed for the location that he's in. But it just makes for an interesting scene that is, in and of itself, is ordinary, but it's seen in an interesting way. And that's really the key to be able to bring a street sensibility to everything that you photograph. It's not what you photograph, it's how you see it, and consequently how you photograph it that makes all the difference. All right, thanks for watching the video and for contributing images to the Flickr Pool. If you've not yet submitted images to the Flickr Pool and you want to, all you have to do is go to Flickr, do a search in the Candid Frame, and ask to be added. And you just need to make sure that you're doing that on your computer rather than your phone or tablet. You'll get a notification if you're on your phone or tablet telling you that it's a private group and you can't be added. That's just an issue with Flickr when you're trying to use a device other than your computer to be added. Just go to your computer, whether it's your desktop or a laptop, and ask to be added. I'll be more than glad to do so. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please subscribe, give us a like, and I'll see you next time.